Picture this. It's past midnight on a cold January night in 1934. You're riding your motorcycle along the dark shores of Loch Ness when suddenly, something massive blocks your path. You slam on the brakes as a creature the size of a small bus turns its head toward you, stares with large oval eyes, then bounds across the road in 2 giant leaps before plunging into the black waters of the loch. This isn't fiction. This is exactly what 21-year-old veterinary student Arthur Grant claimed happened to him on January 5th, 1934, in what became one of the most famous and controversial Loch Ness Monster sightings of all time. Today, we're diving deep into a case that divided investigators, launched newspaper headlines, and still sparks heated debates nearly 90 years later. So buckle up. We're about to explore one of cryptozoology's most fascinating mysteries. Arthur Grant wasn't just any random person claiming to see a monster. He was a 21-year-old veterinary student from Polmyle, near Drumnadrochit, someone training to work with animals professionally. And that detail would become crucial to both supporters and skeptics of his story. The date was January 5th, 1934. Just after 1 a.m. Grant was riding his motorcycle home along the newly reconstructed Inverness-Glasgow road near Abriacan, on Loch Ness's northeastern shore. It had been raining earlier, but now the night was bright and moonlit. Grant was cruising at about 25 miles per hour when he saw what he first thought was a man or some dark object blocking the road ahead. As he got closer, about 30 to 40 yards away, that's when everything changed. The object turned what Grant described as a small head on a long neck directly toward him. And in that moment, Arthur Grant realized he wasn't looking at a person at all. So what exactly did Grant claim to see? According to his testimony to both the Daily Mail and the Scotsman newspapers, this was no ordinary animal. The creature had a small, eel-like head with large oval eyes, perched on what Grant insisted was a long neck. The body was described as very hefty. Grant later compared it to a cross between a seal and a plesiosaur, that extinct marine reptile you might recognize from Jurassic Park. But here's where it gets really specific. Grant claimed he could clearly see 4 flipper-like limbs, 2 front flippers, and 2 behind that appeared to be webbed. The creature also had a tail that Grant estimated at 5 to 6 feet long. And importantly, he noted that this tail did not taper like you'd expect from most animals. Grant estimated the entire creature at 15 to 20 feet in length. That's longer than most cars. The animal appeared dark in color, possibly black or grayish. And then came the dramatic finale. Grant said the creature took fright at his motorcycle headlight, made 2 massive bounds across the road, and plunged into Loch Ness with a tremendous splash. Grant dismounted his bike and followed to the water's edge, but all he could see were ripples spreading across the dark surface of the loch. Now here's what makes the Grant case particularly interesting. It was actually investigated. The very next day, A.F. Hay, a fellow of the Zoological Society of Scotland, along with a team from the Daily Mail, went to the site with Grant to look for evidence, and they found some intriguing things. There were slide marks going down the embankment toward the water, and about 70 yards further along the shore, they discovered what appeared to be 3-toed footprints. These prints were massive, 24 inches long and 38 inches across, spaced 30 inches apart from heel to heel. The investigators also found an area of flattened bracken, as if something large had been resting there. Hay's official report, published in the Scotsman, suggested that a walrus might have made these marks. The story immediately captured public imagination. Remember, this was 1934, during the height of the Great Depression, and Loch Ness Monster sightings had been making headlines for months. Grant's account, complete with sketches he drew of the creature, became front-page news and cemented his place in monster lore. But not everyone was convinced. Zoologist Maurice Burton took one look at Grant's sketch and declared he was unimpressed. Burton argued that everything Grant described, the animal's appearance, size, and especially that distinctive bounding motion, perfectly matched an otter. Think about it. Otters can appear much larger than they are, especially in poor lighting. They have long bodies, they bound when moving on land, and they frequently stand upright. Burton suggested that what Grant interpreted as a long neck could have been an optical illusion created by an otter carrying fish or simply rearing up. Here's where our story takes an even more intriguing turn. There's a persistent rumor, though not well documented, that shortly after his encounter, Arthur Grant stopped at the Lewiston petrol station to make a phone call. According to this account, station attendants allegedly overheard Grant saying they swallowed it during his conversation. Now, I need to be clear. This detail doesn't appear in any of the contemporary newspaper reports or official investigations I've found. It's become part of the folklore surrounding the case, whispered among Loch Ness researchers and skeptics alike. But if true, it could suggest that Grant's encounter was planned or fabricated, perhaps as part of a hoax or publicity stunt. The phrase, "they swallowed it," would imply that Grant successfully fooled someone, the newspapers, the investigators, or the public. But without solid documentation, we can't verify whether this phone call ever actually happened, or if it's just another layer of myth that has grown around this famous case. This is the challenge with historical mysteries like this. Over the decades, fact and fiction become intertwined. Stories get embellished, details get added or changed, and what might have started as a simple misidentification becomes a complex web of claims and counterclaims. Critics also pointed out the obvious problems with Grant's observation. This happened after 1 a.m., with only moonlight and a motorcycle headlight for illumination. The entire encounter lasted just seconds. How could Grant possibly have observed such detailed features? The exact shape of flippers, the size of eyes, the length of the tail, under those conditions. And then there's the smoking gun, those impressive footprints that seem to support Grant's story. They were later identified by the British Museum as fakes, made with a stuffed hippopotamus or rhinoceros foot, probably a big game trophy that had been converted into an ashtray. Researchers have also discovered that Grant produced several different versions of his sketch, each more elaborate and monster-like than the last. The earliest drawing was simple and uncertain, but later versions showed pronounced flippers and dramatic long necks. This suggests Grant may have embellished his story over time. To understand the Grant case, we need to look at the bigger picture. By January 1934, Loch Ness Monster fever was at its peak. The famous Spicer sighting had occurred just months earlier in July 1933, and newspapers were full of monster stories. Some researchers have even pointed to the 1933 film King Kong as a possible influence. The movie featured a long-necked, plesiosaur-like creature that bore a striking resemblance to Grant's description. Could popular culture have shaped what Grant thought he saw? There's also the socio-economic context to consider. Over 200 Loch Ness Monster sightings were recorded between 1933 and 1934, during some of the worst years of the Great Depression in Scotland. Some psychologists suggest that paranormal beliefs often strengthen during times of social stress and hardship. The idea of a prehistoric survivor living in a Scottish loch offered a kind of escapist fantasy during a particularly dire period. Could the Grant sighting be part of a broader phenomenon of mass psychology and folklore creation? So where does this leave us today? The Arthur Grant case remains deeply divisive among Loch Ness researchers. Supporters point to Grant's veterinary training, arguing that someone studying to work with animals professionally would be unlikely to mistake an otter for a 20-foot monster. Some have suggested more exotic explanations, perhaps an escaped sea lion, a wandering seal, or even an unknown species of long-necked pinniped. A few cryptozoologists still hold out hope for something truly unknown, possibly a surviving plesiosaur or giant eel. But the scientific consensus is clear. Most zoologists and historians consider the Grant sighting unproven at best. The combination of poor viewing conditions, the influence of existing monster stories, the hoaxed footprints, and the simple explanation of a misidentified otter makes this case highly dubious. Whether Arthur Grant saw an unknown animal, a wandering seal, or nothing extraordinary at all, His story perfectly illustrates how eyewitness testimony, media enthusiasm, and human imagination can transform a brief, ambiguous encounter into enduring legend. The Grant case teaches us something important about how myths are born and sustained. In our desire to believe in something mysterious and wonderful, we sometimes see monsters where there are only shadows, plesiosaurs where there are only otters, and ancient mysteries where there are only modern misunderstandings. But perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. After all, it's our capacity for wonder, our willingness to believe in the impossible, that makes us human. Even if Arthur Grant only saw an otter that cold January night, his story has inspired countless people to look up at the dark waters of Loch Ness and wonder, what if? What do you think happened that night in 1934? Did Arthur Grant encounter an unknown creature? Or was he simply the victim of poor lighting and an overactive imagination? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world's greatest mysteries. Until next time, keep wondering, keep questioning, and never stop looking for monsters, even if they turn out to be otters.